Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your Wednesday so far. I'm Ariel, and this is Joe. Every year we do an event in our office in New York City where we recap WWDC. We usually go to WWDC, both of us, and we come back with a lot of ideas, and we're both business-minded when it comes to everything new. So while everyone else is talking about all the cool stuff that you can do as a developer, we tend to look at things from the business perspective and what does it mean and how can we use these to get more downloads, grow our business, and in general, just be more successful with our apps. This year, we're doing this virtually. This is actually the first webinar that I'm hosting in quite a long time. So this is going to be fun, and I have Joe here with me. We'll introduce ourselves in a minute. Just before we get started, two quick things. One is we have an open Q&A. There's a little Q&A button on the bottom of this. If you have a question or you want us to address something, throw it in there. We'll try to address it as we're talking. And if we can, there's dedicated time at the end. We're going to try and run about 40 minutes for me and Joe talking, and then about 20 minutes for questions and answers. So we'll have time to address all of them. And then also, this is recorded. So at the end, we'll shoot out a link if you can't stay all the way to the end, or if you have a question, drop it in. We'll answer it later. And then you'll get it by email. So with that in mind, let's kick this off. I'm Ariel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of App Figures. We do app analytics and app intelligence. And I have with me Joe. Introduce yourself, Joe.
Hi, Ariel. It's good to see you again. My name is Joe. For those who don't know me, I am an independent developer and designer working in the iOS/Mac ecosystem now for several years, probably right when the iOS platform kicked off back in 2010. So made an app back in the day with a couple business partners of mine called Teleprompter Plus. Is probably the thing I'm known the most for. I'm also host of a podcast called Release Notes, where we talk about business stuff all the time. We've been doing that now for, I think, 7 years plus. We're up to like 370 something episodes, however many Mondays that is. Yeah, so, and that's with my co-host Charles Perry. And I recently moved to Boulder, Colorado. I used to live in New York there with Ariel, which made it really easy to do this in the office. So yeah, I would have to get on a plane this year for this, which I probably would have done if this weren't going on. But yeah, about here, I moved to Boulder the day of the first COVID case in New York. And then 2 weeks after I moved here, 2 weeks, my apartment building had a big fire, and my apartment would have just been water damage or whatever. But so right now I consider myself the luckiest person in America.
Oh, you probably are. I mean, you got on a plane and you got off a plane and you're still healthy. So I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, that's one of the last opportunities to get on a plane. Yeah.
I got back from vacation and then we locked down the office the same week. Wow. So it was definitely interesting. But now everything in New York is starting to open up, and it's it's a lot better than other places, I think. And we wore masks everywhere we go, so it's fairly safe.
There you go.
But yeah, so WWDC this year. Where do we even begin? I mean, I watched the keynote and I was like, well, this is going to be cool. They've taken their time. Instead of just doing it at the week that they were going to do it on, they decided to take a little bit more time, pre-record everything, so it's going to be maybe less stress for all the employees. And they really managed to get so many people involved. That's crazy. Every talk is different people, and the people who work on it, which I think is cool. I mean, it's not new. They've been doing it for a long time, but it kind of feels like there were more people. But it was something about the videos this year was a little bit different. So I expected them to go a little bit on, and they just kind of stayed at the surface level. Did you feel the same way?
I agree. Yeah. And I think you and I might be two of the few people who noticed that. I think a lot of people were just loving the video format in general. They liked that they had instant access to being able to read the code, for someone like me who's never, I've always gone to San Jose or San Francisco for DubDub, but I never actually sat in on the sessions. I would always watch them at home anyway. So to me, this format was nicer in that it was very professionally done. Obviously, they had a crew. They really showed off their campus, and they managed to script these things out very well. There are no mistakes. There's no blubs, and the kinds of issues, demos going bad, and things of that nature you avoid. But I agree with you. The thing that I noticed, and I haven't heard anyone else talk about but you, is that all the talks were very high level, and they kind of really stayed on the top surface of like, here are the things you can do. Here's a little bit of code showing you kind of how, and then go read the documentation and get the rest, right? Which kind of is what has to happen anyway. I don't know about you, but for me, I can't really absorb 40 minutes of nonstop code anyway. So I kind of like this format that way. But I think for people who are really hoping for a deep dive to really dig into the heavy details of things, there really wasn't a whole lot of detail there. It's true.
Yeah, I mean, I watch all the sessions too, especially the ones that I really care about, because you can't really cover everything, and you can't, even when you're there, you can't see all the sessions. It's just impossible, and there's just way too much good stuff. But I wanted a tiny bit more, just like a slice more, if that makes any sense. So
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it worked. I think the shorter videos, I know a lot of people really love the shorter videos, and I love the fact that I can just kind of scrub to wherever I want. So I watched maybe 20 videos in a span of less than an hour because one, they were short, and two, I just scrubbed to all the points that I wanted. And I think that's cool. So overall, I really enjoyed it. And I think there were a few missing parts, like in the App Store Connect session, the one I care a lot about, obviously. They touched on clips for a very long time. I think 80% of the session was just clips. But then at the end, they're like, oh, we also have this API, and we also have this brand new reporting screen. You'll find out about them at some other session.
Right.
And because the way the app is, all the sessions are one big list. So either you go one by one, or you just watch one, scroll to the next one you want to watch that again, which hopefully will get improved for the future. But overall, I think they did an amazing job with the videos. The production quality was just second to none.
Yeah, and I wonder if that high level of production led them to lean more towards marketing. That's a great way to put it. Like they spent a whole long time on clips in that video, and you're right, because it's like, here's this new whiz bang feature. And even I know a lot of people did complain about the platform State of the Union. They spent a good like half hour almost talking just about ARM and what it can do, and nothing about like, here's how your apps are going to work, or how,
Exactly.
they weren't getting into the details of how Xcode would compile those apps. They were just talking about the capabilities. It felt more like a commercial than a deep dive for developers. But again, all those complaints aside, I agree that the format it's so much more pleasant to watch. Just like you said, the lengths, I love just being able to see, oh, wow, this one's only 15 minutes. Okay. I'm about to doze off, go to bed. I've already watched 10 or 11 videos. I'm like, I think I can watch one more if it's only 15 minutes. So yeah, before they would have to stretch them each one out to that 45-minute session time. And I've never been a fan of that. So yeah.
Yeah. Totally agreed. And it's even funny because so many of the sessions are 13, 15 minutes, and then you have a 25-minute session or a 19 minutes. It's like, okay, that's what they really want to talk about. Right. So you can tell. But I feel like at the high level, they introduced a few interesting things. It wasn't like full blown, holy wow, there's so many things, I don't even know where to begin. It was really focused this year. And you can tell they did a lot of work probably under the hood, and we're probably going to see it in iOS 15. But the obvious things that we saw included widgets, which I installed on my phone and are actually pretty cool. And I think they will open the door to a lot of new things. Clips, which I'm curious, I'm hesitant, and I'm really excited for altogether from a business perspective, because I think they're going to be the gateway into hopefully awesomeness. Privacy, and you can tell that privacy was kind of at the core of every session. Even if they didn't talk about it, it was there. And ARM, obviously, the kind of big one that they kind of dropped on us, that it's going to be the biggest thing ever, and then barely talked about it. I think introduced more questions than answers. That was kind of my recap. I know there were a few other things like BackTap, which is interesting. If you haven't tried BackTap, it's a new feature where you can tap on the back of the phone, and you can get actions and I think Siri shortcuts or shortcuts in general, which we both tried, me and Joe. And I both agree that it's a little bit too sensitive, I think, for where we are today. And things like the indicator around the camera and nearby interactions, which are all cool. But that was kind of my take, that clips, widgets were the big thing, and privacy is dominating. How did you feel about what's new?
Yeah, I feel like from an iOS perspective, this is sort of an S year, as a lot of people have been saying. There's a reason why all of my apps on my phone, I threw the beta on the phone, and basically I only have one or two apps that are having any kind of issues, right? Most of them are just running just fine.
One of them.
Yeah, yours being one of them. And it's funny. It's so funny because the series keeps suggesting in the morning that I go and I open. Yeah, I have the widget up there for Siri shortcuts suggestions, and it always suggests app figures. I'm like, well, I can launch it. It's just going to crash on me. You're working on that, I know. But usually by now I'm getting flooded with emails from people who updated my apps and are saying, "Hey, your app's crashing on launch," or ever. This is the first year ever that none of my apps are crashing on launch, so I feel lucky in that way. But yeah, I think it's testament that like a lot of the changes are all in the Springboard, and the Springboard's sort of unrelated to your app in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. I agree with you that widgets are going to be huge. I just think of them as giant complications. They're watch complications basically because they don't have a whole lot of interaction, but you can deep link from them. And I think like just using Apple's built-in premium ones, they're fine and they're good. And I'm already rethinking my entire way of using my home screen. I can't wait for third parties. There's so many of my apps that I like, oh, that widget's going to be awesome. I can already tell what they're going to do there. So yeah, I think that's going to be a big one. Clips is an interesting one because I don't think a lot of developers are talking about it, but I think marketers are going to go bananas over this. And I think people who are users like me who travel a lot are going to love the idea of just being able to go to a new town and not have to download that, the 15th parking app that I've had to download, or, just because I went to one restaurant once doesn't mean I want your app. So I like the idea that you'd be able to just have these apps that are kind of, you use them for 5 minutes when you need them and then they go away. And I know Android tried that a few years back. And so it's not a new idea, but I have a feeling that in very targeted, very specific niches, these are going to be a big deal. And I think there's going to be some companies who really take advantage. I think there'll be development shops who specialize in creating clips for businesses.
Oh, I can totally see that.
Yeah.
I think there was even a session, maybe it was that, or maybe I was building complications for others, for third parties, or maybe it was about building clips for others. It was one of the two.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, clips. Yeah. And I think that, and the example they used was Yelp, right? Where Yelp, like you're advertising all these businesses. So why wouldn't you say like, hey, restaurant C, we'll bid you a little clip. Yeah, exactly. I could see that happening.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. They introduced some stuff that I think would probably evolve a lot in iOS 15. And like you were saying, Android did introduce instant apps in 2-3 years ago, maybe even more. I don't remember at this point. I don't think it took off. Everyone that I know who has an Android hasn't been raving about the fact that they no longer need to download apps. And we see on the data side, no app has suffered from having an instant app versus a not instant app. But, I mean, the concept of arcade was also tried before. Amazon had Underground several years ago, and that never took off, where arcade is, I think, doing better, at least.
Yeah.
You hear less about it. I was really expecting or hoping for something about arcade this year, maybe them opening it up to more third-party developers, as opposed to the deals you have to make with Apple, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on specifically with arcade. I have a feeling it's more successful than news or something like of that nature. But Apple is trying a lot of different businesses at this point. And yeah, I think arcade was one of the more successful ones. It would be good to see them open up that further, but I don't know what their expectation is or how they want to. It feels like there's a bundle coming of Apple services that hasn't quite materialized yet. But now that Apple TV is going to be free for most of us for at least a little while longer, I think maybe when that becomes more of a everyone has to start paying for Apple TV, because Apple TV Plus definitely seems like the one that's taking off more than any of them. A lot of people totally thought that wasn't going to go anywhere, and they're signing huge deals with really good content producers. I mean, they showed off the new one, but I think I hear about one almost every other week. Some other producer, director, somebody, or writer that I admire is going to be making something for Apple TV Plus. So I don't think that one's going anywhere anytime soon. But arcade seems to be like maybe the second most successful one they've had so far.
Yeah, I mean, if you throw in music and you think about TV, you think about maybe Apple News Plus. I can see like a premium Apple subscription, which may not have anything to do with developers when you think about it, but it kind of does. And that also it's a good lead in for, I think, privacy. Apple's doing all these things to attract more people to their platform. And those people are going to eventually also need apps. So if you come to the Apple TV because you like the content, which you can't get anywhere else other than in iOS or an Apple device in general, eventually you'll need a teleprompter or a game or something else, or a utility, or you're going to download the Twitter client or Facebook client or Basecamp client, depends on what you do. And so you're going to have to go to the App Store and you're going to have to download something. So if consumers are trusting the platform, then we benefit ultimately, kind of indirectly, but ultimately. So, and I think we've seen more of that, and we will be seeing more of this. And I do like your idea of like a premium Apple services package that has all the pluses.
Yeah, because then once you're built in, why? Because right now, most people out there who are Apple customers have iPhones, right? They don't necessarily have a Mac. A lot of them don't have Apple TVs. A lot of them don't even, the watch is starting to grow pretty big. Maybe a lot of them have iPads. But the vast majority of them only have iPhones, right? And so anything they can do to bundle around more services to get you more into the ecosystem means more potential customers for us. And I think we as developers devalue that sometimes. We don't understand that not only are these more and more customers coming around every year, but they're valuable customers because they're the kinds of customers who value their privacy, who have money to spend for the most part. I mean, they complain about having to spend $5 on an app, but they have the money to spend. And so it's just a matter of appealing to them. I mean, it's a very valuable core group of people that we're talking about.
Absolutely, and it's big. It's big
Yeah.
enough so it's not just a small niche that has money. It's really enough for all of us to be happy. And I think one of the other things that we don't think about too much is the fact that Apple has really established that trust. And so we are cutting through a lot of friction that I think on Android and on other platforms you just don't have. Or you don't have that sort of trust built in already. So every interaction is, do I trust this particular person? And I think once you have that, it becomes so much more difficult because now I need to think, do I like this particular teleprompter app? And do I think Joe is a trustworthy person? And that's a lot of questions to answer.
That's right, and you don't have to trust me. Your credit card stays with Apple, right? And
Exactly.
there's the downside to that, which the New York Times talked about this week, which is that I don't know my customer. I don't have access directly to that customer, and that is a downside. But the upside is I don't have to convince you to hand me your credit card, and that's huge.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of app developers are thinking like, oh, well, if Apple would just let me do my own payment system, I'd do it that way, and I'd be so much better off. And I'm like, I don't know if you get as many sales as you think you would if you're just random schmo company who suddenly had to establish that trust that people already have an Apple. People know I download it on my phone. I download an app on my phone. It's not going to be a virus. It's not going to. I mean, now obviously some apps are getting away with some shady stuff because there's millions of apps and Apple can't catch them all. But for the most part, you're not worried about those kinds of things when you download. And so I think there's a ton of value in that, but you have to learn how to appeal to that particular person and then live with the trade-off, which is that Apple's never going to tell you who they are.
Exactly. And they will take a slightly less than small cut of your profit. But at the end of the day, they're establishing so much that it makes it easy. And talking about privacy, this WWDC, it was kind of obvious that privacy exists in almost every session. If a session wasn't specifically around privacy, it had some sort of a mention of privacy or mention of how you would do it in a private way. And we saw it from features specifically, like the indicator around the camera when you have a voice call or a video chat. And which really confused me. I thought it was just some sort of a bad pixel because of the beta in the beginning. I totally did not expect that to be a thing. But it does make sense. And the issue that was in the news last week with the clipboard and how apps use and abuse it. We talked about this a little bit before about how in some cases you kind of have to do this. Apple doesn't give you a better way to do this. But now they're going to flash in your face every time an app reads the clipboard, maybe until next year where they expose an API or something to do a little bit better. Ultimately, I think that's actually a good thing. Every WWD or every new iOS, you see new notifications about apps doing things. Last year was Bluetooth, I think. This year it's clipboard, and it's also I get the notification about an app trying to connect to other devices on my network. Like, you can do that? Really?
And that's the new big one this year. In addition to the clipboard, the other one is that, this one is capable of connecting to other devices.
Yeah,
and one of my apps, I have a timer app named Finn that actually does that. It'll look for an iPad or an iPhone, then connect to them, and so that you can run the timer. The idea behind it being like you could be sitting there at an AV table, and the person on stage could have a timer on their iPad, and you could start it from the stage. So my app legitimately has a good reason to do that. But a lot of people are saying, "Oh my apps are like popping this thing up. Like, why does YouTube need this? Or why does it?" Well, YouTube might be connecting to your stick or whatever, but like, you have to really, it causes you to think for a second, like, does this app really need that? I don't see why this video app that I watch needs Bluetooth, right? And so it causes you to pause for a second and you say no to that, and what you're basically 99% of the time killing is some analytics thing that you don't want anyway. And so I think the pasteboard thing is a little unfortunate because I know a lot of legitimate apps that use it for good things. Like, there's a great app called Deliveries. I don't know if you've ever used it, like to track your UPS and FedEx deliveries and everything else. And what you do is, like, you can copy a tracking number from anywhere, and as soon as you launch the app, it doesn't say like, hey, do you want to have a new add a new delivery? It just assumes, like, if it finds a properly formatted tracking number, it says, hey, you're probably about to track something new, and it just automatically starts that process. It's like, well, that's a great feature. It saves me 2 steps every time I'm in this app. So I want him to be able to keep doing that. But at the same time, you look at TikTok doing it literally every 3 seconds. It's like, okay, now they're just basically, I don't know what the heck they're doing at that point, like beyond some kind of crazy, shady stuff. And so I think it's good, but I do hope that Apple gives us a way to like, for something like that, just ask for permission at the first launch. Like, hey, this app wants to use your pasteboard. Is that okay? And here's the reason why. And as long as you can explain that, it's like Steve Jobs said a long time ago. Privacy. It's all about you consenting to these things. It's not that we don't want advertising. It's not that we don't want some of these things. It's that we want the control over that.
We want to know what's happening. And you touched on advertising, and the IDFA going away was kind of also big news. And, a lot of people keep saying that it's going to kill advertising and it's going to make life extremely difficult. But honestly, I don't think so. It's 2020, almost 2021. All those companies have such sophisticated ways to fingerprint users that have nothing to do with a specific device ID that can be scrambled, that I think for the most part, it's just going to be less input into whatever they use to fingerprint, and they might have to find something else. But they do some crazy stuff now, some crazy stuff that I think is going to take Apple years to block. And when they do, they'll find something else that ultimately ads run so much. So you look at what's happening with Facebook these days, and the boycotting, and Facebook changing their policies, even though they really didn't want to. So where the money is, it's where the power is, and where the power is, they'll find ways to fingerprint. So I think it's a hurdle, but nothing else. And
I think it's very interesting how Apple has kind of pitted themselves against the entire rest of the industry. I think when Apple first started pushing the privacy thing, it was a smart move. I thought immediately, like, oh, this is awesome, because this is the one thing they don't need. Google needs your info and Facebook needs your info.
Exactly.
Apple kind of doesn't. They sell you hardware, right? That's how they make their money. And so I thought, wow, what a brilliant idea. But then a lot of the other companies tried to, like, oh, we're into privacy too. And they tried to redefine what privacy is. And everyone laughed in their face about it. Like Facebook, it was so obviously ridiculous that they were just like, all right, forget it. We're not going to bother. And so now Apple this year is doubling down on it, like literally, like, hey, we're the only company who cares about your privacy. They can almost say that at this point. And so, yeah, they're going to keep leaning into that harder and harder, and they're going to keep playing this cat and mouse game with people who are doing shady things, because why not? It's in their best interest at this point. And some of the stuff they're doing in Safari, where it's like, it's true, it's gotten ridiculous. Why does a website like Bloomberg have 79 trackers on me? Like, why would you have, like, can't you find a 2 or 3? And the other thing someone pointed out is, like, if you're using Segment, that looks like one, but that could be like 20 things that Segment is shooting out to. So I mean, the amount of bandwidth, the amounts of battery life that we're losing over these things, there is a huge trade-off on that. And I think that people need to be more aware of it. And I applaud Apple for making that. Yeah.
And it's so slow. And I think that change will also impact, I think, how we acquire apps, because the change to the App Store page, which is a part of what I see as privacy, what their focus on privacy, is that now apps will have to show or say what they collect. And I'm really curious to see how all this is going to play out, because they are partially asking users to do this, or asking developers to provide that information. And how do you know? How do you know that? And I'm assuming I imagine Apple will do a really good job at making sure that what goes into the privacy policy is also somehow represented. But I'm really curious.
Yeah, it's a good question, because they've made us put a terms and conditions link for years, but I always wondered, like, do they just check that the page loads, or do they actually read it? Right. So
do they even check
it's hard.
That?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a hard thing to nail down when you've got this kind of scale on that many apps. But at the very least, they could say, like, hey, this app, someone could easily complain, this app told me that they only do X, Y, and Z, but they're also doing, R.
That's also true.
And so then they can at least nail them on those sorts of things. Like, hey, we told you had to disclose this and you didn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard to say.
Going back to that consent, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious to see if that will be that's something that impacts downloads. So if an app says they collect user information, are people going to be a little bit more weary about it and be like, let me find an alternative?
Right.
And, in just a short few months, we'll know. We'll have the data to tell. And,
yeah, I think it's telling that little panel, the little, like, boxes that they created there, they're very scannable, very easy to kind of grasp. It's not like the description that nobody reads, because it's several paragraphs, and, like, who's going to read all that text?
Exactly.
But, like, when you see a little bit with certain icons, and, like, it catches the eye a little bit, it does become more like a nutrition label, and maybe people will actually read it. Who knows? It's interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah. So privacy aside, because we spent a lot of time on that, what I'm most excited about is Clips, actually. So widgets are nice, and I think widgets are going to be very useful. I'm already thinking about the kind of widgets we can put out, and make sure that you don't even have to use the app. You can really just do the one thing you do every morning without having to tap or use Siri for this. But I see Clips as being a major change for the industry. Like you were saying, parking apps, or apps that you don't necessarily need. I see news apps being the same way. I know the New York Times was all in the news about how going with Apple Plus distance you from the user, but here's an even easier way to acquire a new user directly, no strings attached, but at the same time, you know who it is. Right. And I think that's going to be big. Where do you see Clips going other than just parking?
I think it'll start with those kinds of places. I think restaurants, especially in the age of COVID, restaurants, that's like, well, instead of printing out a menu and then making you hand this person your credit card, you just basically download the clip and read the menu, order your thing. You have less interaction with your waiter, and they bring you your food, and at the end of the meal, you pay right on your phone. Those kinds of things could be revelatory, really. You save all your money on printed menus and everything else. I mean, now obviously you have to build an app, which is not easy for restaurants to do per se, but again, I could see an industry cropping up around low-cost apps for certain kinds of businesses that are kind of white labeled, basically.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think that's pretty useful. Obviously, the coffee shop, anywhere where you can be in easy eyeball distance of one of those QR codes, where it's like, oh, well, there's your app, boom. Before, you might have seen one of those things, and like now you have to go download it from the App Store, and you're thinking, well, do I really want to spend the bandwidth? Do I really want to spend the time?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Whereas this is such a short, quick interaction. You get to read a little blurb about it. You don't have to go searching for it anywhere. It just pops right up. And you could say, hey, use this really quickly. You can make your payment today. Maybe we'll give you, reward points or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you can at that point, you have at least some way to incentivize them to download the app proper. It's up to you. Like, you've got your chance.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And I think that's the big thing too. They're opening the door for you. All you have to do is you have to convert them. So you don't have to find them they don't have to find you on the App Store. They don't have to do, it's even less ASO work if you think about it, because you're right there. You can tell them, look at my app.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can even have a banner come down from your website that instead of right now where it would take you to the App Store, it would just take you to the clip instead.
Yeah.
Which again, it's a lower risk to the end user. It's a lower impact, right? And then people are saying with the coming of 5G, that 10 megabyte limit it's going to download in seconds. Yeah. It's not going to take anywhere near what your average app would take to download. And even that's pretty quick, but this is going to be so much faster. You don't have to worry about any of the, what happens if your phone isn't, I'm wondering actually if it's, once in a while your phone won't be authorized for the App Store and then you have to go type in your whole password. Like I'm hoping that never, I'm imagining that never happens in Clips. Like you're basically always authorized and it'll just download. I don't know. Because they say it starts downloading as soon as the little panel comes up. So as soon as you scan the code, it just starts downloading. And if you say cancel, then it cancels the download, but it's already working even before you say okay. So I imagine the clip will come down and you won't even have to do any kind of App Store authorization.
That kind of makes sense because it's essentially a glorified website or a more powerful website that just works through your app. I kind of wonder if that's going to push more developers away from the paid app mode and towards free and find a way to monetize inside the app, which is, in my opinion, something very positive.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also going to be a big boon for Apple's sign in with Apple and things like that. Because the last thing you want to do is interrupt the process of getting started. And so if you can create an account with one tap instead of having to fill out 9,000 bits of information, that's a huge start. If you can pay with Apple Pay, obviously this is all benefiting Apple, of course, keeps them in their ecosystem, keeps them with those couple of percentage points on the Apple Pay transactions. But there's also benefit to the user. Like I don't want to sign up for 900 different apps. It drives me nuts, but at the same time, I never trusted a sign in with Facebook button. Yeah. Right. So at this point, it's like, okay, this is an easy, safe way to do that. Again, downsides. I'm not getting the email address of the actual person. I'm getting this fake email address maybe, and other things. There are trade-offs, but the question is is what you're getting, this access to an easy QR code, NFC, whatever, worth that trade-off?
Yeah, and ultimately, what do you do with the information you get? If you think about it, I saw this huge Hacker News thread, this is a while back, maybe a month ago or so, about a whole bunch of people were trying to move away from Google Analytics on their websites, and a whole bunch of other people saying, no, the data is great. And I think both of them are right. If you don't need the data, don't collect it. If you do need the data, you have to collect it, figure it out. And I think that's the same. If you're not going to do anything with an actual email, if you're going to send it an email and it goes through, do you really care if it's an anonymized email given to you by Apple or the person's Gmail?
Right. That's true. If it's anonymized, you're still able to send them emails. And the only way they're going to revoke that is if you do something they don't want you to do, right? And at that point, you lost them anyway.
Exactly. So, and I think that's a good thing. I think that keeps us honest. If I send an email that is extremely spammy and tries to get you to buy something you absolutely don't need, you're not going to trust me. So it doesn't really matter if you hit spam in Gmail or you disassociate your email from the anonymous email, or just tell me, Ariel, stop sending the emails. Right. I think it's all the same.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is in practicality, but I think a lot of marketing has been so driven towards number of emails that we have, right? And that's how they get paid. But you're right. I think there needs to be a change in the industry, and I don't know how it comes about, but I think you're right. There's this tendency to collect. When you see 79 trackers on a website, they probably only need 5 of those, right?
Yeah.
And like the other ones are all superfluous data that they're experimenting with, or they tried once and now they're not even looking at it anymore. And it's the truth. Like, why do you want that data? It only makes you legally responsible in some ways.
Yeah.
Like the government's going to come to you and one day and knock on your door and say, I want everything you've got on this person. Like, why would you want that on your servers in the first place?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's definitely interesting. And I think it's definitely going to impact downloads. I think ultimately people will be a little bit more concerned about what they give their information to. Maybe not immediately, but I think it instills the sort of, like I was saying before, the sort of trust. And that's going to get more people to eventually be able to download our apps. And I think that's a positive.
Yeah.
And more people. And again, clips do the exact same thing. They get more people. They kind of break the barrier and get people closer to us. And I think to some extent, widgets are like that, but on the other side. So widget will make sure that engagement continues to happen. So you got them through a clip, you converted them to an app. Maybe they're never going to open it again, but if they need whatever it can do, plump it on their home screen. And there's so many different ways with stacks, the way they do it. And I think there's going to be so much opportunity here, especially once we start seeing how the big developers do it. So how does Facebook do it? How do other companies that are really good at engagement do it? How does Tinder do it? I really want to see the Tinder widget, because Tinder is great at engaging people. That's why they're #1 in the top grossing chart forever and ever, or maybe top 10. Mm-hmm. But I want to see how they do it, because we're going to learn so much about how do you keep someone who wants to be engaged actually engaged.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Remember, for years, the big thing was like the home screen space. Can I get on your first page of the home screen apps, right? And then it was like, Facebook started splitting their apps, and Foursquare built Swarm, and everyone started like, oh, I want 3 or 4 of your icons, right, on your home screen. And now you're right, with a widget, you could take over half the home screen, right, with that one widget. So you own their space.
Exactly.
And if you can make that compelling enough, that's huge. And you're right, like the apps icons themselves go away. I don't need your app icon anymore. I can tap on the widget, and that will bring me to your app.
Exactly.
And it's just a giant billboard sitting on your home screen if you can compel them to actually put it on there. And that's going to be the real trick. So I agree with you. Yeah. And I think another interesting point you're making about like not even launching the app anymore. I've seen this coming for a long time. I built it last year. I built a caffeine tracker that you basically never have to launch. You just use Siri shortcuts for it all the time, and it goes right to your health kit. It was a kind of a pain in the butt to make, because it's still kind of new days for Apple. Apple hasn't really thought through like what you can do in the background versus what you can't do for apps like that, where I really need certain data that I can't grab without launching the app. But I do see a future where a lot of your apps just become services. I mean, as we move towards eyeglasses or the home pods and things like that, where there is no physical, there's no visual user interface anymore. You're basically just communicating with the phone, or maybe you never get off the home screen. Like literally, you're just doing things for a very, very short period of time. You're launching a shortcut that does something in your app, and your app never even launches. I think that is kind of where things are going, slowly but surely. And I think it behooves us all to start thinking of our apps that way. We used to be this whole like pixel perfect, let's design this experience to take over your whole screen as long as possible. And nobody wants that. Like moving into the future, people just want to get in your app, get out, do what they need.
They just want to get stuff done. I think that's ultimately what it is. Short interactions, powerful, meaningful, amplified interactions. You do one thing, but 10 things really happen. And I think that's why shortcuts exist. That's why Siri shortcuts are now a thing. And I think, Recap is a perfect widget candidate. Because if I can have it on my phone, and every time, or on my home screen, and every time I need something, I can just do it from there. I don't need to open the whole app. I don't need to think, which screen do I need to go to? And so they're really making life extremely simple for us.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I think
very powerful.
Absolutely. I think we're going to see a lot of widgets coming out as soon as iOS 14 ships officially. Maybe some of them are going to be kind of hokey and unnecessary, but we'll learn. I think everyone will kind of adjust. And hopefully there will be some sort of a metric of how many people use your widget on their home screen or which screen they go on. And if anyone from Apple is hearing me, please add this. But I've already sent some emails. We'll see how far I can get. But if we have that sort of information, then we can tell that when we make the interaction, the simpler they are, maybe the more they get to the home screen. And whatever data we get, I think that's going to be extremely powerful.
That would be really awesome. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. Like we can obviously track deep links into the app. So if someone taps on your widget, we can track that. But you're right, we won't know whether or not you're on someone's home screen, or whether the smart stack put you up front, or you're like number 7 in the stack. It would be amazing to have that data. I don't know if Apple will ever give it to us, but keep trying. Keep fighting a good fight, Ariel.
I'll do what I can. But that's a good lead in also to the Mac, because the Mac has undergone a whole new redesign, and some people are saying this is no longer the Mac that we know and love. This is something completely new. This is like a glorified iPad. I don't know how much I agree with that. I think Apple for the longest time has been trying to maybe not merge the two, but to bring them very close. Because like you were saying last time we talked about this, there's just so many different things they need to maintain these days. It's different architectures, different screen sizes. Everything is so different. And now with bringing the Mac to ARM, they're dropping one huge problem that they had. And by doing that, now everything is running on ARM. They even showed a demo of a game running on the Mac. They didn't talk about it for some reason, which I thought was crazy. But now you can run these apps across everything. And so whether you should do it or not, I think is a whole other question, which we can get to in a second. But ultimately, now you have this platform that consists of all these devices. You have the TV, you have the watch, you have the phone, and you have the laptop or desktop at that point. And I think they just want to make them work the same and also look the same. But what do you think? You're a Mac guy. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think a lot of developers have these conspiracy theories that Apple's been trying to get rid of the Mac for who knows how long, and they just want to turn it into a giant iPad. And you're right, like all those things that you said. And they're not looking at this from an easily, which makes most sense to me, is look at it from Apple's perspective. They've got 4 platforms. 3 of them are extraordinarily similar, and one of them is this odd old person. Right? That's like the older 20-year-old stepbrother, and then the 3 kids. And you're trying to merge the two because you've got internal talent, right? You might have a great iOS developer who's building amazing, incredible stuff for the iPad for how many years, right? And you want to like do something really cool on the Mac, and now you have to train them in UIKit, because they just never touched that before, right? So if all the platforms are more similar, and if you could build them all with the same UIKit elements, right, then you basically have developers that you can push and put in on any project you need at any time. You'd be way more flexible. You also take a huge burden off your documentation team. Like you're just maintaining 4 OSs is ridiculous, right? So take the one that's the most different and try to get it over to the more in the same family as iOS. That makes perfect sense to me. And I think the way they've done it with Big Sur, honestly, that was the big surprise this year, right? Everyone knew the ARM transition. Okay, great. Yeah. But no one saw a complete redesign, or at least they weren't talking about a complete redesign of Mac OS. And in retrospect, it makes perfect sense, right? Why wouldn't you do them both at the same time? It's a much bigger marketing splash. But I think the way they did it honors the Mac. And I think the fact that a lot of old school Mac heads are saying, okay, I have reservations, but they did a really nice job, is a testament to the fact that it's not like Apple doesn't understand their own product. They know what the Mac is, and they know what we love about it. But they also know they have many, many, many more iOS users, and a lot of them would potentially buy Macs if they were more similar. And so, why not? And plus, it is going to make our lives more easy in some ways, I guess more difficult in other ways, because maybe the expectation will be that your app will run on all 4 platforms. But at the same time, building for those 4 platforms is easier than it's ever been. Yeah. Swift UI isn't quite ready yet, but it gets better. It's going to get better every year. Catalyst got way better than most of us expected it. I thought it was going to be a real temporary 1-year experiment kind of thing. And as soon as Swift UI came along, people were like, forget this. Swift UI is the way to go. But if you've got a big app, and you can turn it into a Mac app in 2 weeks, as opposed to rewriting the entire thing for iOS and Mac in Swift UI, Catalyst becomes suddenly a much more attractive option. And so I think Apple is looking all around to just basically get more common software and again, just build that ecosystem so that there's just more things from Apple, more time you spend on your Apple devices, more Apple devices you buy, which is good for them. And so we have to see okay, how do we make what's good for Apple also good for us? Well, okay, the people are, like you said, there might be a lot of new Mac users suddenly because they buy a new Mac and they figure, well, I can run some of my iOS apps on it. Great. And they'll start doing that, and they'll realize that these iOS apps running on a Mac aren't perfect. They're not so great. Maybe they'll look for alternatives, right? And now you can be sitting in that opportune spot to say, okay, yeah, you don't like that iOS app running on your Mac? Here's a Mac version that was crafted specifically for the Mac. Go buy that one instead.
And didn't require a whole other team, didn't require, months and months of work, and kind of just came together. I think that's going to be a very large advantage. You have an app that's on a Mac and on an iPad, and you're thinking of even going Catalyst.
Yeah, exactly. I built my very first app that I built is a little aspect ratio calculator that I built on initially on iOS, and then I ported it and learned AppKit. And yeah, I mean, I'm looking at that now and thinking like this should be one app, and it's the same thing with our teleprompter app. Like it's out of date, it's old. We've been considering like where do we go with this? It needs really a full refresh and a full rewrite. And we have a Mac version and we have an iOS version. And the Mac version never sold as well, and it never got our attention the way it could have because it's a lot more work to maintain two completely different platforms. And so now we were thinking like if we're going to redo this thing and like build it with a lot of the new technologies that are going on with SwiftUI and like make it a fully modern iOS app, well, of course we just go Catalyst at that point. Like, why would we rewrite the whole thing all over again? And depending on how much SwiftUI we can put in there, we might even be able to do it, more natively. I don't know, but again, I don't want to say Catalyst isn't native because it is, especially if you're running the same processor on both machines. It becomes more and more commonality there. But I don't think it's weird. I never would have said this before, but I really feel like Catalyst is not a bad option. It's actually, you can make a decent Mac app from what I can see. I mean, I've been playing with the new Messages app, the Maps app, all the ones that Apple built out of Catalyst, and they're running pretty fine for me.
And I think that's a testament. Going back to the stepbrother, it's really what it is. You never gave the Mac, as much attention because the audience is a lot smaller. We can see the number of apps that exist on the iOS App Store is close to 2 million. The number of apps that exist on the Mac App Store is close to 30,000.
Right.
You can see that people are putting their effort and their time into what they believe will give them the most benefit and the most revenue. And I believe for a bigger screen, that's now the iPad. And that's why Apple has been doing so much for the iPad. But there's no replacement for an actual computer with an actual keyboard, with an actual trackpad that you don't have to touch the screen in order to find that one pixel if you're not using a pencil. So that makes a lot of sense. And we've been thinking about, from the beginning, when we designed our iOS app, we said our app is only for iOS, only for iPhone, I mean. And for the iPad, we'll build a whole new thing. And if we want to go to the Mac, we'll build a whole new thing. Because it kind of made sense, different screen sizes, different expectations. And we never built an iPad-only app, and we never built a Mac-only app because so much effort for such little return where we can just continue to improve the iOS app or continue to improve the website. Right. And so I think with Apple trying to bring them closer, not merging, but bring them closer, that's going to solve the problem for many of us. And it's going to be, you'll invest a few more days or a few more weeks or a few more months, but you will have something really substantial.
That's most definitely. Yeah, and I even think there are going to be exceptions. There are going to be some iOS apps that run perfectly fine on your Mac, and you won't have to touch them, right? And just let them go, because that is an option now. I think for most of those folks, they're going to say, well, it's 80% of the way there anyway, or 90% of the way there. Let me just finish it off in Catalyst and make it that much better. Like they demoed that Readdle app, the document app-based app that they had. And like those folks make really good apps. And it was really amazing how well their iPad app was running on a Mac and looked, I mean, at least for me, it looked pretty nice. Yeah. Like as soon as they said like iPad apps on your Mac, like not even touching them, I thought, okay, this is going to be terrible. Exactly. And I think a lot of apps will be terrible, but I think that one like was like, oh, but at the same time, so part of me thinks like, oh, they'll never bother. They'll just leave the iOS app running on the Mac, and that's great. But you take a company like that, they're going to say, how much investment would it be to just turn this into a Catalyst app? And then we can do some more stuff with it and get an even bigger audience. So I think Apple definitely wants more software on the Mac, and they're going to get it one way or the other.
Yeah, and I was very hesitant to say that the Mac is actually going to be a platform that delivers on the business side in the beginning of this. But the more I think about this, and the more I read about this, and the more I talk to people about it, I realize that no, it's going to grow. With ARM being the leading processor, people are going to move away from thinking, oh, my newest MacBook only has an i7, where my Dell laptop has an i9, and I have this many gigahertz, and I have this much stuff, and I can't change anything. And it's like, no one cares. Does it work? Does it do what it's supposed to fast enough? And if it does, great. So I think it's going to change that sort of stigma. The prices for the Macs are still pretty wild and pretty high, and they're just getting higher and higher. But maybe that's going to change too. We don't really know.
That's true, but I also think that you're right. That price comparison is where they get nailed, right? I mean, I was just talking with Charles on our podcast. He bought a Dell laptop recently, has basically the same processor of the MacBook Pro that I just bought, and then my MacBook Pro was almost double what his was. Easy. And so on the box, for someone who's just looking at numbers, they're saying, oh, this many gigahertz versus this many gigahertz. I would be surprised if Apple even mentions processor speed for any other advertising for any other ARM Macs. Like my guess is that they're just going to say, it's our latest A15 chip or M whatever chip. You know what I mean? Like I honestly think they're not even going to mention any of the specs beyond like, oh, it also has this T2, it also has this Bionic chip, and like those kinds of things that are practical to people to say like, oh, this thing will store my passwords and my precious data in an enclosed spot that even the government can't get to. Okay, that's the one I want. Yeah. As opposed to trying to constantly fight over how many megahertz you have, like as if that matters anymore in the real world, or how many cores versus this. I mean, that stuff does matter, but not to your average person. For the average person, the iPad is already faster than they'll ever need. Exactly. And the MacBook Air is already faster than they'll ever need. So it's like, to me, the way they're going to advertise it, like the marketing team has probably been like drooling over this opportunity to just drop Intel and all those comparisons to Intel. It's going to be amazing for them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think timing-wise, we kind of ran out of time for our 40 minutes have become 50 minutes, which is kind of normal for us if you've seen us before in the office. And there was a question early in the beginning about whether we think that Apple is actually going to merge the iPad and the Mac. And I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't see that happening. I mean, I think they want to move more consumers toward the iPad for sure, and that's why they're adding a keyboard to it and trackpad. And they want more people to be able to just have an iPad and not have to worry about a Mac, because they don't seem to want to do the low end on the Mac at all. Like they want the Mac to be kind of the expensive upper option, and obviously there are expensive iPads too, but I think what they're thinking is that for consumers who have really basic computing needs, the iPad is more than enough. And if we can push them get a little more every time we think that more powerful, then so be it. But I think the Mac users are always going to be a specialty field. Like there are going to be certain industries where like coding on a laptop is always going to be better, even if they give us Xcode on the iPad. Exactly. There's going to be certain things that you do, like music creation. I can just think of a lot of things where like you just need that horsepower. All those YouTubers out there, like it's going to be a long time before they can use LumaFusion and apps like that to record and do some quick editing and things like that. But at the end of the day, they're going to run back to their giant Mac Pro workstations when they need to get output. Yeah, so
more than the basic tools, you can't really use an iPad, in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's not to say the iPad isn't powerful and isn't great in its own right. There's certain things I would much rather use the iPad for that are super high-end professional.
Exactly.
But at the same time, there are tasks that are just more suited to a mainframe kind of sitting in your home kind of computer. Yeah.
I completely agree. And I think that also sums up, in a sense, this WWDC, that they're bringing things together so there will be more to build on. And it's probably going to take some time. With ARM, they said that it's going to take years until it actually fully kicks out Intel. And I think the transition is a whole conversation for another 40-minute session. Right. How we go back away from Intel. But at the same time, it's stuff that's going to happen. So this WWDC, I think, to me, was a lot of foundation. Privacy slowly becoming taking a prominent role. Widgets, which I think are great, and I'm sure we'll see more of them in the future, clips and how they evolve, and all the way out to the Mac becoming kind of a full brother of this family of things that everyone loves, not just things that people have in their pockets. People legitimately love their iDevices because they just work. Yeah. And so to me, that was this WWDC.
Yeah, in a nutshell. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's definitely a transitional period for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a unification, transition, and I think I'm looking forward to watching the videos next year, because I have a feeling they're going to keep this sort of like short and to the point, maybe approach to this, but the videos are going to be great. They're going to give us hopefully what we need. So questions from the audience. We have one from Alec, and Alec is asking, have you thought of a novel way to use app clips to help users share the app and its functionality with friends? That's a good question. I don't think clips were meant to share apps.
They could amongst friends. I don't know if that would be like, hey, look, I have this NFC code. Why don't you download this app? I don't know if that'll work, but I could see, like, let's say some of the conferences you and I go to, I could see sponsors having a little NFC thing, and it's like easier than sending them home with an URL to say, hey, just download the app, try it for a little bit.
I guess it's not a bad idea. Maybe if the app specifically implements some sort of like a friend view. So it's not, hey, go download this app and do whatever this app does. It's more like, hey, get started with this clip. And the clip really brings you in. So if I'm thinking from a conversion standpoint, the apps would have to implement some way of knowing that this is me trying to share with you, and not just you trying the app for the first time for some reason because you found it in a magazine.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, it would have to be one of those things. I'm thinking of like our mutual friend Curtis Herbert, his app Slopes, right? You're on the slopes. Someone sees over your shoulder, like, hey, you're downloading. What app are you using to track your skiing? And they're like, hey, well, actually, it's this app called Slopes. The code is right here on my helmet. Go download it. And they could like literally just go boop, and then now they've got the app. You're right. That might be a friend-to-friend kind of transaction where they can literally see the thing in action and then say, like, how do I get that? And they're like, well, now there's an easy way to get it. But that, again, you have to encourage your users to want to share the app, to evangelize the app for you. And that's a little trickier.
Yeah, it's like a two-sided interaction. So yeah, you want to put it on, and I think it would be really cool if you can get it on your helmet.
Right.
Something Curtis should somehow figure out a way to sponsor.
Yeah, exactly.
But it should also be, I think, from the app side, you have to have that sort of, I know you're a friend, or I know you just shared this. How do I engage you most quickly? It's kind of like on the web, you have landing pages, the concept of a page specifically for a feature. It doesn't really have any links that are unnecessary. It doesn't get you to think, it gets you to just take action. So hopefully that's a good answer to Alex's question.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about that, but clips are basically landing pages for apps. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
I see my next guide. And then we have another question from Jeff, who's asking if we think Swift UI on iOS 14 is ready for usage in a full-featured enterprise app.
That's a great question. I don't know enough. I mean, I could definitely tell you that last year I wasn't ready. This year they've added quite a few things, but I still feel like there are limitations. And one of my hesitations, like I know the new template out there in Xcode will let you just say, like, literally it'll start an app. It's without any UI kit or all. It just literally, you're just importing Swift UI and working from there. And you could easily just say, oh, here's my Mac target, here's my iOS target, here's my watch target. And I think that's really cool, but I worry about getting halfway down an app and then realizing, oh, there's something in Swift UI I can't do. And now I got to back out to UI kit. And like, I'm not sure exactly how easy that would be at that point, right? If I got to back out somehow and get back to the lower level stuff, it feels like that might be one of the limitations of Swift UI that I'm most worried about. Like last year, even I built the watch app for Recaf in Swift UI, and then I realized there was no way to press a button to go all the way back to the beginning of a navigation stack. Like you could only go one step at a time. And a lot of people had written like weird hacks. I found a cool hack around it eventually, but it involved relying on older technologies to get it to work. And I worry like if there is no workaround, then you're kind of stuck midway through development. Yeah. That's tricky.
And then what do you do? Although this question specifically asks about enterprise apps, and from what I've seen, enterprise apps have in many cases been UX-wise less good than other apps, either HTML or one of those converters. So maybe that's a step up.
Yeah, that's a good point. And enterprise apps tend to be a lot of table views and collection views, right? And that's two things that work really well in Swift UI right now. So plus I think combine and a lot of those technologies, the more reactive kind of way of coding speaks a lot to people who write in the enterprise and is better. I mean, when you need updated information and it needs to be accurate and you want one source of truth, that sort of thing, subscribing to changes is a big plus. So yeah, I think we're moving in that direction. Whether or not it really depends on the need of the specific app, I think, and how fancy your UI gets. You're right. If it's a real basic kind of enterprise app, then you might be in pretty good shape with Swift UI at this point.
Yeah, I think that's so. Probably the answer to this is give it a try and just kind of alpha test whether you have all the functionality you need. And if you have all that functionality, it's probably ready. And
the bonus is you won't be rewriting it in 5 years. So.
One would hope.
Yeah, one would hope.
Or, I mean, the bonus is you can probably run on a different platform a little bit more easily in the future. So if you need to take your enterprise app to the watch, there will probably be some components that will be easier to share versus some sort of a HTML app.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you're going to build your widget or whatever. Those aspects are going to have to be in Swift UI anyway, and that's again Apple saying like, "Here's the future, start moving." You're right. You might end up with more common code that way in the long run if you go that route.
And I think that's also a good point. If you're thinking widgets, if you're thinking things other than just the app itself, writing in Swift UI is probably going to make that possible. Where other things that are not native are going to be really inflexible, I would say, in that sense. Yeah. And I'm also making the assumption here that the app starts as non-native. Hopefully that's not a bad assumption, but this is what I've seen from enterprise apps in general. And I get it.
And then the other big consideration too, obviously, is backward compatibility. Like, can you be iOS 13 or 14 only?
Yeah. Oh, I guess that's also true.
Yeah.
If you need that, then probably no.
Yeah. If you need iOS 12, then it's a non-starter.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's the answer to Jeff. And I think that's all the questions we have and also all the time we have. So perfect. Somehow we managed to keep it in time. Maybe it's the video aspect of
Yeah.
this. So I want to thank Joe for joining me, and I want to thank everyone else who's joined us. Hopefully you got answers to all your questions. If you are curious about business and apps, you should definitely subscribe to Joe's podcast, Release Notes. It's a great podcast that I listen to all the time, and I've been on multiple times. And enjoy the rest of your day. Is there anything else you want to close with, Joe?
No, just thanks for having me again. It's under circumstances, it's nice to see that we could still pull this off and do our annual tradition. It's become a bit of a tradition. Was it the third or fourth year we've done in a row? So
I believe third, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's great to have to be on again and chat with you. We always enjoy our conversations. So
Yeah, absolutely. They're conversations. I think that's what makes them interesting. And if you have any questions for either of us, we'll share our best way of communicating with us in the chat, and we'll also put it in the email when we send the recording. So if you have any questions, find us on Twitter or email or whatever it is, and I'll be happy to talk about any of this. I love talking about this. And yeah, so take care, everyone. It was a pleasure, Joe.
bye.
Bye.